Radhe Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunda Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Vihari Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jai Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunda Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunda Vihari Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Raya Yashodanandana Vrajadana Randana Yashodanandana Vrajadana Randana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivaswati Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivaswati Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Jaya Radha Gokulananda Radha Gokulananda Radhe 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 Jaya Sitaram Lakshmana Hanuman Jaya Sitaram Lakshmana Hanuman Jaya Sitaram Lakshmana Hanuman Jaya Sitaram Lakshmana Jaya Gauranga Nitai Gauranga Nitai Gauranga Nitai Jaya Gauranga Nitai Jaya Gauranga Nitai Gauranga Nitai Gauranga Nitai Jaya Gauranga Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo Gaura Paramanande Haribo Excuse me. Jai Om Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Pravijakacharya Asolta Shishimad Abhay Chanim Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakut Vaishnava Vinda Ki Jai Premska Ho Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Suyadeta Radha Sivasi Gaura Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai Mayapur Vandam Ki Jai Bhaktivedanta Madhya Ki Jai Shri Radha Gokulananda Ki Jai Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman Ki Jai Shri Gaunitai Ki Jai. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. A bit of a sore throat this morning. Hare Krishna everyone. So this morning we are reading from the Caitanya-Caritāmṛta, as usual at the weekends, the Madhya-lilā, chapter 13, and we're doing verses 68 to 80 of chapter 13, because we're going to carry on till we get to a major purport. So what we're going to be doing is, first of all, just say the invocation. Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna. So with your blessings I will continue. What I thought I would do, because it's quite a lot of verses, in fact verses 68, wait for it, up to 76 are in classical Bengali. And then, as it happens, then they're quoting from various scriptures in Sanskrit. So those particular verses, 77 to 80, are in Sanskrit. But what I've decided to do, the aptly named Sachi Mataprabhu, who is Bengali, is going to be reciting the classical Bengali up to 79, and then I'll read the English, which is easier for me. All right, so what we do with Sachi Mata, we'll make sure your microphone is on, and we'll continue with from verse 68. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
এই মতো মহাপ্রভু করে নৃত্য রঙ্গে ভাসাইল সব লোক প্রেমেরও তরঙ্গে.
In this way, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu danced in great jubilation and inundated all the people with waves of ecstatic love.
69. এই মতো ছইল কৃষ্ণের রথে আরোহণ তার আগে প্রভু নাচাইল ভক্তগণ.
Thus Lord Jagannath mounted his car, and Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu inspired all his devotees to dance in front of it.
70. আগে শুনো জগন্নাথের গুন্ডিচা গমন তার আগে প্রভু জয়ছে করিলা নর্তন।
Now, please hear about Lord Jagannath going to the Gundicha temple while Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu danced before the Rath cart.
71 এই মতো কীর্তন প্রভু করিল কতক্ষণ, আপন উদ্যোগে নাচাইল ভক্তগণ।
The Lord performed kirtan for some time and, through his own endeavour, inspired all the devotees to dance.
72 আপনি নাচিতে যাবে প্রভুর মন হইল, সাত সম্প্রদায় তবে একত্র করিল।
When the Lord himself wanted to dance, all 7 groups combined together.
73 শ্রীনিবাস রামাই রঘু গোবিন্দ মুকুন্দ, হরিদাস গোবিন্দানন্দ মাধব গোবিন্দ।
The Lord's devotees, including Srinivas, Ramai, Raghu, Govinda, Mukunda, Haridas, Govindananda, Madhava and Govinda, all combined together.
74 উদ্দণ্ড নৃত্যে প্রভুর যবে হইল মন, স্বরূপের সঙ্গে দিল এই নবজন।
When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu decided to jump high while dancing, he placed these 9 people in the charge of Sarup Damodar.
75 এই 10 জন প্রভুর সঙ্গে গায় ধ্যায়, আর সব সম্প্রদায় চারিদিকে গায়।
These devotees, Sarup Damodar and the devotees in his charge, sang along with the Lord, and they also ran beside him. All the other groups of men also sang.
76 দণ্ডবত করি প্রভু জুড়ি দুই হাত, ঊর্ধ্বমুখে স্তুতি করে দেখি জগন্নাথ।
Offering obeisances to the Lord with folded hands, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu raised his face towards Jagannath and prayed as follows. 77
নমো ব্রহ্মণ্য দেবায় গো ব্রাহ্মণায় চ জগদ্ধিতায় কৃষ্ণায় গোবিন্দায় নমো নমঃ।
We're in the Sanskrit section now, obviously. Let me offer my obeisances unto the Lord Krishna, who is the worshipable deity for all Brahminical men, who is the well-wisher of cows and brahmanas, and who is always benefiting the whole world. I offer my repeated obeisances to the personality of Godhead, known as Krishna and Govinda. This is a quotation from the Vishnu Purana 119.65.
78 জয়তি জয়তি দেব দেবকী নন্দনো হসো, জয়তি জয়তি কৃষ্ণ বৃষ্ণিবংশ প্রদীপঃ, জয়তি জয়তি মেঘ শ্যামলः কোমলাঙ্গো, জয়তি জয়তি পৃথিভারনাশো মুকুন্দঃ।
All glories unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is known as the Son of Devaki. All glories to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is known as the light of the dynasty of Vrishni. All glories to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose body luster is like that of a new cloud, and whose body is soft as a lotus flower. All glories to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who appeared on this planet to deliver the world from the burden of demons, and who can offer liberation to everyone. There's a verse from the Mukunda Mala.
79 জয়তি জননিবাসো দেবকী জন্মবাদো, যদুবর পরিষদ স্বৈ দৌর্ভীর সন্ন্যর্ধর্মম, স্থিরচর বৃজিনগ্নঃ সুস্মিত শ্রীমুখেন, ব্রজপুর বনিতানাং বর্ধয়ন কামদেবম।
Lord Krishna is he who is known as Jana Nivas, the ultimate resort for all living entities, and who is known as Devaki Nandana or Yashoda Nandana, the son of Devaki and Yashoda. He is the guide of the Yadu dynasty, and with his mighty arms he kills everything inauspicious as well as every man who is impious. By his presence he destroys all things inauspicious for all living entities, moving and inert. His blissful smiling face always increases the lusty desires of the gopis of Vrindavan. May he be all glorious and happy. This is a quotation from the Srimad Bhagavatam 10.90.48. So thank you, Sachimata, for your help there. So now we're going to go on to the verse itself, which has the purport. Of course, the whole thing is a purport in a sense. Okay. Naham vipro nacha narapati napi vaishyo nasudro. It's quite difficult, isn't it? It's because this is actually from the Padyavali, which is one of the first works of Rupa Goswami. It's a kind of compilation of different poems from his period. So it doesn't go in the same meter as the usual Bhagavatam text. So we'll go through it line by line, a bit slower. Naham vripo nachanara patir napi vaishyo nasudro. Naham vani nacha grihapatir no vanastu jatirva. Naham vani nacha grihapatir no vanastu jatirva. Kintu prodyan nikila paramanandar punamitabe. Kintu prodyan nikila paramanandar punamitabe. Gopi bratu pada kamalayo das dasanudasa. Gopi batu pada kamalayo das dasanudasa. I'm sounding a little bit horsey, a bit bassy this morning. So, should we go for that again, or should we open out to anyone who would like to go? I'll go through it. Oh, Shamsundar Prabhu. Yeah, go ahead. It's okay. Well done, Hare Krishna. It's okay to do it like this. So anyone else would like to go? Maybe one of the ladies. Naham vipuna chanara patina pivaishna sudro. Nanina cha grihapati no vanastu satirva. Into paryon nikila paramananda puranamitabde. Gopi batu pada kamalayo das dasamudasa. Well done, Hare Krishna. So, translation. I'm not a Brahmin. I'm not a Kshatriya. I'm not a Vaishya or a Sudra, nor am I a brahmachari, a householder, a vanaprastha, or a sannyasi. I identify myself only as a servant of the servant of the servant of the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna, the maintainer of the gopis. He is like an ocean of nectar, and he is the cause of universal, transcendental bliss. He is always existing with brilliance. Okay, please repeat after me. I'm not a Brahmana. I'm not a Kshatriya. I'm not a Vaishya or Sudra. Nor am I a brahmachari, a householder, a vanaprastha or a sannyasi. I identify myself only as the servant of the servant of the servant of the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna, the maintainer of the gopis. He is like an ocean of nectar, and he is the cause of universal transcendental bliss. He is always existing with brilliance. It's a beautiful, beautiful verse, isn't it? It's one of my favorite verses, actually. And the purport is this. This is verse 74 from the Madhya-lilā, an anthology of verses compiled by Srila Rupa Goswami, as I mentioned before. It's beautiful. So I'm looking forward to say a few humble words on this topic. Om Jnanam Tiridam Dasha Gananjala Shalakaya Taksho Om Meditam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Titanya Mano Bishtam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Darati Svapadam Tikam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Rata Kanta Namushchate Vanchakalpatrubhascha Kripa Sindhu Badevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pachadine Nivasesha Shunyavadi Prashatyade Satadine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Sivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we're at a very, very wonderful point here in the Caitanya-Caritāmṛta, the Madhya-lilā, right in the middle here. So he's not a sannyasi at this point, I don't believe. But he's been touring South India, of course, chanting and dancing and preaching all the way with his followers, disciples and well-wishers. And now he's returned to Jagannath Puri. And, of course, for what? For the Rath Yatra festival. Of course, Rath Yatra has always been very significant in our tradition. Obviously, if you go far back enough, we know the form of Lord Jagannath can be traced, of course, to it when it manifested himself as a log to King Indradyumna. That was way back in the Satya Yuga, a very, very long time ago. So technically speaking, Puri has been a place of worship all the way back to the Satya Yuga, which is millions of years ago, so almost beyond our comprehension. But even if we go relatively recently, when Lord Krishna was on the earth, of course, 5,000 years ago, we know, of course, when Krishna returned to Vrindavan with Balaram and Subhadra, his sister, he kind of arrived now, pulled on carts by the gopis and other residents of Vrindavan to welcome them back. So in our tradition, and of course, what to speak of Lord Caitanya as well, of course, dancing so elegantly with his disciples and friends and associates in front of Lord Jagannath in Puri itself. So, of course, Rath Yatra has always been very, very highly significant in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, for it's tied in with Krishna Lila. Of course, there's the story of Indradyumna, and of course, what to speak of Lord Caitanya. But also our other, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, our Srila Prabhupada, all had a special place in their heart for Lord Jagannath, of course, and the Rath Yatra festival, of course. So, I'm impelled to say a few things about that. Of course, when we look at Bhaktivinoda Thakur, actually had a very strong relationship with Jagannath Puri. He was actually helping to manage things there, as well as being a district magistrate. And he spent many years actually in Puri, of course, with his good wife. In fact, at that time, the teachings of Lord Caitanya had more or less gone underground because it was being contaminated by Sahajaisms and pretenders and people who were misunderstanding Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's ecstatic ecstasy and there were intimidators or people who were pretending to be gopis even if they had male bodies. No, these type of things, which was an embarrassment actually to people, acharyas such as Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He had 11 children, I think it was, he and his wife, but he prayed for a special son, a son that would actually continue the mission, to reinstate Lord Chaitanya's teachings, not just in India, but all over the world. And he prayed, he said, please give me that special son. Of course, that son was born, known as Bimal Prasad. Now, on Monday, it's Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's appearance day, so we'll be learning more about Bhaktisiddhanta then. However, let's have a sneak preview into some aspects of his youth. So, Bimal was born, of course, to Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur and Ratnavali, his wife. 6 months after the boy is born, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur named, of course, his most special son, Bimal Prasad, as I mentioned. Around the same time, the carts of Jagannath festival stopped at the gate of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's residence. This is along the Grand Marg. So here you imagine a very wide road, actually. Who's been to Puri, by the way? Well, it's quite a lot, about half of us. Very wide road, actually. You've got the Jagannath temple, then all the way along, and then you've got the Gundicha Mandir down the other end. And if you're heading away from the Jagannath temple towards the Gundicha Mandir, on the left is actually a temple now, but this is actually where Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur would live. So you can imagine it. So you imagine these big, huge carts coming down, and suddenly the carts stopped at the gate of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's residence. And no matter how much the Brahmanas and others, they tried to move it, the carts would not move at all. Not for 3 days. Wow, for 3 days, no matter what they tried. I'm sure they tried engineers, I'm sure they tried to put oil or something like that, a bit of extra grease on the wheels, but they would not move, no matter how hard the Brahmanas tried to push. Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's wife, Bhagavati Devi, brought the infant onto the cart, that's young Bimal, of course, and approached the deity of Lord Jagannath. At that moment, spontaneously, the infant extended his arms and touched the base of Lord Jagannath. And at that time, immediately, a garland fell from the body of the Lord onto the mother and the child. And that was the moment when Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur knew. Of course, Bimal Prasad was born with an umbilical cord around his neck, like a Brahmin thread. So even then, even before that incident, locals were saying, this is the son you've been praying for. This is a very special Vaishnava. But when Lord Jagannath gave his blessings to Bimal Prasad, at that time, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur knew that this was going to be the Vaishnava successor. Seeing this, the priest chanting the names of Hari and told Bhagavati Devi that the boy would certainly become a great devotee. And then he realized without doubt this was the son he'd been praying for. Of course, a very, very wonderful pastime. And again, what about our own Abhay Charan? Of course, what we would now call Srila Prabhupada, but of course in his youth he was Abhay Charan. Even then, of course, there was a special place in his heart for the Jagannath Rath Yatra festival, and I wanted to share that with you this morning. So, of course, young Abhay was born, of course, in Calcutta, and to Mohan and of course his mother. And at that time, I suppose we have to realise now that it was 1886, wasn't it? So he was born. So we're talking about when he was about 6 or 7 years old, I think, at this time. So we're talking about the early 20th century. Was that right? 1896. Not 1986. 1896, excuse me, yes, I knew I got that wrong. So now we're talking about when the young Abhay was young, of course, we're now talking about early 20th century. One of Abhay Charan's favourite times was when the Rath Yatra festival was celebrating. Of course, every year Abhay would come with millions of others to watch the parade. Lord Jagannath would ride on the first cart, Lord Balaram on the second, and Lady Subhadra, the sister, would ride on the third. The carts were very colourful and they had tall canopies that seemed to reach the sky, especially to young Abhay. Of course, he must have been so high. Wow, must have made a huge impression on him. Abhay liked the festival so much that he wanted his own cart so he could have a Rath Yatra parade. He asked his father if he could, and his father, yes, why not? Encouraged my son. Mohan and young Abai went from shop to shop looking for the right cart. This must have been in their locality. Mohan, he went to carpenters and said, "Can you build a small cart for my son?" They could make a cart, but when they told him, well, there is a price, because this is specially made, so of course they put a bit of an extra cost on it, paying cost price, they decided they were overcharging them too much. So, no, that's too much, they said to the carpenters. We can't spend that much on a cart. This happened many times all around the city, and Abai began to cry, poor little Abai, thinking that he would never be able to get his beloved cart. In the end, they decided, we've been looking around enough, let's go home. All right, we can use our imagination. So on the way home, as they walked through the streets, Abai was crying and crying and crying, and his father was trying to pacify him. But an old lady overheard this poor young boy crying. So she approached them and she said, "What is wrong? Why are you crying?" Mohan told the lady that their search for their small cart for Lord Jagannath. "Come with me," said the old woman. "I have a cart that may just be the right size." What a coincidence, eh? Abai and his father followed the woman to her house. She showed them the cart. It was just the right size, although it was a little old and needed a bit of work on it. "How much money would you like?" Abai's father asked. When he heard the price, he was very happy because finally it was just the amount that he could afford, that he was carrying with him. So Abai was able to take his cart home with much happiness and jubilation. The tears had stopped. Together, Abai and Mohan worked on fixing up the cart. They put columns on it and placed a canopy on top. They made it as much like the real carts as they could, even attaching a wooden horse and driver in front. So the extra kind of embellishments there, it seems. Mohan brought paints for Abai and he painted the cart in bright, festive colours. When he'd finished, Abai began to prepare for the festival. He asked his friends' mothers to cook special prasad so he could distribute it at his Ratha Yatra festival. He put the small Jagannath deities on the cart and the parade in his neighbourhood had begun. Every day, Abai's family and the neighbourhood's children joined in the procession. Some pulled the cart while others played drums and kartals. Everyone chanted and sang with joy. His festival lasted for 8 days. Wow, 8-day festival. Even Mohan's friends wanted to join in on the fun, so they pulled the cart too, so adults and children alike, as well as the mothers. Anyone who pulls the cart of Lord Jagannath is liberated from this material world, they declared. And everyone was really appreciative of Abai Charan's annual festival. Every year, Abai would bring out his decorated cart and hold the Ratha Yatra festival. Isn't that a wonderful story there? So actually that brings me really nicely onto something else, which of course is, as we know, Abai was not always Abai. Of course, he became Abai Charanarvindam Day. And then, of course, later on, he took sannyas back to Vedanta Swami Prabhupada, or known affectionately, of course, as just Prabhupada. It's interesting, sometimes, of course, we get used to seeing Prabhupada in this form, but he was once also a young boy. So I think it's a nice little important meditation. But you imagine how Prabhupada felt. Of course, one-way ticket on a cargo ship from Calcutta, and then ultimately to Boston and New York. Start off in humble situation, starting up the first ISKCON temple, 26 2nd Avenue, then moving over to San Francisco, where you had the, let's just say a colourful bunch of young people waiting for him there. And of course, a lot of assistants from Shyam Sundar and Malati and Gurudas and Yamuna and Mukunda and so forth, and Janaki. She said, Radha Gokula Nanda ki jai, Sita Ram Lakshman Hanuman ki, Shashikundai ki jai. Now at that time, there was a bit of trade increasing between India and especially places like San Francisco or Haight-Ashbury, where people were more interested in Indian things. Malati was actually at that time all young fledgling devotees at the time. Malati was looking around a market and saw something that she thought might be from India. So it was actually a small deity of Lord Jagannath, wooden deity. She didn't know what it was. It was about this big. So she took it to Prabhupada and said, "Hey Prabhupada, I think it's from India, what is it?" And Prabhupada saw Malati walk in with Jagannath, and of course, "Hey Jagannath," pays obeisances. Jagannath has joined ISKCON, Jagannath has come. Go quickly back to the market, there should be 2 more in the set. Subhadra and Balaram, of course, Baladev. So they did that, and they managed to, I'm not sure if she managed to get all three. I think she did. She went back. She got all of them. So that time, Prabhupada saw this as a sign that we have to introduce Ratha Yatra to ISKCON. The time is right. So, of course, we know that the first Ratha Yatra, ISKCON Ratha Yatra, of course, began in San Francisco. It was very kind of, I guess you could call, in those days, it was all much more ad hoc. The devotees were very young and they didn't know as much, and everything they knew was obviously coming from Prabhupada. I think they still have it today in many Ratha Yatra festivals in America, the UK, Europe, and so forth. I think elsewhere, you'll see that they have a picture of Jayananda Prabhu on the cart. I think they still do that in the London one, because he did a lot of work, as long as with others like Shyam Sundar as well, carving Jagannath deities in ISKCON. Jayananda did a lot of work as well in those days. Born Jim Kaur in Ohio, he graduated from Ohio State University in 1962 with a degree in industrial engineering. Jayananda was employed as a cab driver in San Francisco when he first came in contact with Srila Prabhupada. Jayananda helped found the ISKCON Center there, and in 1967 later became the president of the temple. He was instrumental in organizing the first ISKCON Ratha Yatra festival. Now, of course, jumping back, that's important because jumping now in time, 58 years later, today, some people may know more than me, but according to my calculation and the Google, which knows everything, of course, there's 526 annual Ratha Yatra festivals in ISKCON around the world. But that's just ISKCON, what to speak of outside, so, thousands. So that's kind of incredible story, isn't it? From such humble beginnings. Lord Jagannath, in fact, in many senses, with those kind of figures, you can see that Ratha Yatra is one of the, I would say, ISKCON's most potent outreach festivals, of course, especially when it's accompanied by book distribution or Harinam, of course, and Prasad distribution. Like in of course, today you've got London, Brighton, Glastonbury, even Leicester, and so many, Birmingham, so many Ratha Yatra festivals are going on, Croydon, Reading, so many festivals, big ones, small ones. So this, of course, the Leela. Oh, excuse me. Can someone get that? Because it's got scriptural writing on it, so I can't leave it on the floor. Thank you very much. So ISKCON and Lord Chaitanya's mission, manifested as ISKCON, has got a special, deep relationship with Lord Jagannath and the Ratha Yatra festival, and it always has done. Because when you think about it, what is Ratha Yatra? What's it really all about? What it's about is the fact that Lord Jagannath's coming out to the people. Especially if you're not from India, especially me, for example, they're not going to let me in the Jagannath temple, right? But if I was there, if I could stand the heat, and there's a few devotees who have been there, I know a few devotees who have been, of course, to Puri in the summer to witness the actual Ratha Yatra festival where there's millions of people. Very, very hot in what he was describing to me. But at that time, it didn't matter. They saw him and they loved the ISKCON devotees. They brought him on the cart and he managed to hug Lord Jagannath like that. He's about this big. He managed to hug him like this and have his photo taken with him. So Ratha Yatra festival is a time when all those barriers, caste gap barriers, for example, or racial barriers, or whatever it may be, or religious barriers, all go down because Ratha Yatra festival is the ultimate source of outreach. I think that, whereas the other time of year that obviously sometimes Jagannath is sleeping, or sometimes the temple is open, sometimes it's not open, sometimes it's arti time, sometimes it's not. But on Ratha Yatra, Jagannath just says, here I am, woo, and everyone can join in. So you can imagine a similar mood, a very ecstatic mood must have taken place when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was dancing with his associates in front of Lord Jagannath. It must have been incredible, actually. So what I wanted to do in the final section of the class this morning, we were talking a little bit about the early days of Ratha Yatra in San Francisco. And we were also talking a little bit about Shyam Sundar and Jayananda and so forth. So I was looking at Shamsundar's book, set of 3 volumes, Chasing Rhinos with the Swami. Who's anyone have seen those? Shamsundar has. Very nice. It's basically his autobiography about his life. It goes from when he was, before he was a devotee, right until quite recently in his relationship with George Harrison and the Manor. Of course, the early days, New York, San Francisco, traveling around the Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan and Juhu Temple, and all these temples springing up in the late 60s and, of course, 70s when Prabhupada was around. So I thought that, I love to study his book. So I was looking at Chasing Rhinos, Volume 1, which is basically the early days, and reading about Shamsundar's early experiences in setting up the first or second, and of course, Ratha Yatra Festival in San Francisco, but also the first one in London as well. And of course, it's very sweet, and we have to understand the bhakti behind it all. Just like, for example, I was reading about young Abhay Charan, who had his makeshift cart, took it home, had his parents helped him make this cart, gifted by an old lady, it seems, and then with his friends and with the local children and with local parents, had a festival. And it must have been absolutely saturated with bhakti. It may not have been a huge affair, but it's the devotion, it's the bhakti, which is the currency of Mahaprabhu. And this is what Lord Jagannath wants as well. So at that time, Shamsundar Prabhu was making errors and so forth out of innocence, but it's a lovely section of his autobiography. But the bhakti, of course, was there. I'm not going to do much of an American accent, but if it becomes American every now and then, just give me the benefit of the doubt. All right, so basically, where are we here? This is, as April 1967 passes into May, I finished carving another Lord Jagannath, and Balaram and Subhadra will follow in time when we ship them off to the 2nd Avenue Temple in New York. So he's actually not only carved a first set, but he's just carved another set, and one of the sets is obviously for New York. Now today, New York Ratha Yatra goes right down 5th Avenue. Right underneath, of course, from starting at Central Park, going right down 5th Avenue all the way to Washington Square Park. And again, it's a huge, huge affair, attracting thousands of people. So you imagine this. You imagine the prediction of Bhaktivinoda Thakur that, of course, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the visions they had that, the chanting of the holy names would be in every town and village. So, of course, so this started here. Brahmananda. When we got the first 2 Jagannaths in New York, we didn't know what they were. We thought that maybe they were stacked on them, one on top of another, like they do in Native American. The totem poles, they thought it was like that. So we were standing and looking at them, making jokes, and Swami came in to the door and said, pays the bass, says, "This is God." And everyone just hit the deck. All bowed down to Lord Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra, realizing who they were. This was no totem pole. And the mood changed, and Prabhupada, it was a very grave mood. He wanted his disciples to get serious, I think. Janardhan Prabhu had just opened a Krishna Conscious Centre in Montreal, and with his 3rd branch of ISKCON, we are now truly an international society. Remember, this is back in 1967 now. Most of the men started growing seekers at that point, and the little ponytails traditionally grown by men who worship Krishna, added Shamsundar. So let's leap forward now to the actual San Francisco car festival. They advertised it as a car festival for the public. Sunday the 9th of July, 1967. We're talking about the summer of love. We're talking about a very hot Californian weather here. And Prabhupada said, so Shamsundar said, what do we use? We haven't got a RAF card, I mean, okay, the young Abhay Charan was able to make one, but they wanted something that was much larger, of course, suitable for the steep, hilly streets of San Francisco. So Prabhupada said it'd be okay to use a flatbed truck and then decorate it and put the deities on top. So Shamsundar had to find a flatbed truck. So they asked the guys next door in Haight-Ashbury, and they said, yeah, you can use our truck. Their truck had Digger U painted on the front bumper and an painted on the grille. But the problem was, it seemed okay, but it wasn't really big enough for their purpose. So we rented a new model GMC 20-foot open-sided flatbed truck. 8 feet at the rear was reserved for the deity's house, and the 12-foot middle section was open for devotees to stand and sit for kirtan. We would put the sound system in the area too, along with a little generator to power everything. The digger's truck would precede our truck in the parade and carry celebrants and free lemonade to pass over to the bystanders. Remember, it was quite hot. It must have been about over 30 degrees, so free lemonade would have been a welcome thing, especially if people are dancing and singing. We set up sawhorses in the parking lot behind the temple, drove the rental truck in there and got to work. I had some wood left over from a job I had done earlier and bought the rest with my drug bust refund. A guy named Bob Simmons, we called him the Beach because he was a surfer and always wore shorts. He came over to help. Jayananda, of course, he was there too. Jayananda was several years our senior. He was nearly 30, so we looked up to him like a big brother. He was a solid Midwesterner, straight like an arrow, but the fact that he fell in love with the Swami and was strictly following the Indian yoga process, so far into his upbringing, impressed us deeply. Of course, Shamsund and the others, they're talking about early mid-20s themselves. They're young men, young enthusiastic men. He would sit in sutan pants and with a white dress shirt, with his eyes closed tight, hearing the Swami, rocking back and forth in deep concentration. His simple take on everything, his unwavering humility and personal strength convince us of reincarnation. Jim or Jayananda, of course, had been a yogi in his past life. We were convinced. He drove a taxi, however, for a living and sold Back to Godhead magazines to his customers, giving all his earnings to the temple, practically supporting it financially. Wow, it's beautiful, isn't it? About a week before the Rath Yatra in San Francisco, devotees came in from the temple one evening to see Krishna was missing from the altar. Balaram and Subhadra were there, but where was Krishna? The Swami had told us a story about Lord Jagannath. Just before Rath Yatra, the deities are given a bath, and sometimes Krishna catches a small cold and will disappear from the altar for a few days to get well. This was his sporting play with his devotees, so we had this bright idea that Krishna should be taken somewhere to recover from his cold. And we secretly took Jagannath out of the temple one day and put him in Haridas's room in his bed. Haridas came to the temple that night, and when the curtains opened, Krishna was gone. Everyone was stunned. Haridas yelled, "Oh my God, the Hell's Angels must have taken the deity! They've taken the Lord!" Malati recalls, "We didn't say anything. And at that night he came home and walked into his room, and he just fell over because there was Lord Jagannath in his bed with his big eyes sticking out from under the covers." But we didn't get the story exactly right. What is supposed to happen, this is Shamsundar now, obviously, he's telling us what's happened, it should happen. 2 weeks before Rath Yatra, there's a ceremony in Puri called Snanan Yatra, where all 3 deities are publicly bathed. Then, because each of them catches a small cold, Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra are taken to a special room where they are pampered for several days and given special treatments and offerings until they get better in time for the festival. So it wasn't about going to anyone's bed, unfortunately. Anyway. On the Rath Yatra day now, Page Street runs up a very steep hill, and the Rath Yatra parade starts at the base of that hill. Hundreds of people had gathered. The cops were busy diverting traffic and maybe worrying about if there could be a riot or something bad with all these hippies around. A little tiny tiger generator switched on, and it buzzed along, amplifying the sounds of kirtan, shook the nearby windows. It was time to shove off. "Any chance the Swamiji's coming, Mukunda?" Haigreva says he's not going to make it, unfortunately. Oh, nuts. Well, maybe we can just go over to Stinston afterwards and bring Jagannath there to see him. What do you think? Then I popped the clutch and we started up Page Street Hill. Of course, being a hill, the generators, as well. And then I popped the clutch up the hill, but so many people were dancing in front, so many kids and dogs running backwards and forwards, that I had to keep moving in the clutch and hitting the brakes. Halfway up the hill, I was a bit late with the clutch, and the truck died. Total chaos. I cranked the emergency brake, keeping left foot on the clutch, the right foot on the accelerator. It flooded. Turning the key, start, finally to a cough, and the engine starts. Now 1 foot on the brake, 1 on the clutch, release emergency brake and take the foot off brake while hitting the accelerator at the same time. Shamsunda was obviously a practical man, wasn't he? And with huge loads of devotees, the Lord, his entourage, and a ton of equipment, we started rolling back. Oh no, we hit something. I pound the accelerator and the truck jerks up the steep hill. No one even notices anyone hurt. I yell at Mukunda and he jumps into the cab. No, but the generator's so noisy we can't hear the kirtan. We decide to put the generator into the cab once we've reached level ground and I can safely stop. Somehow, very slowly, a few hours later, we make it to Ocean Beach and park the truck. I stagger into the truck, into the fresh air, and join in the kirtan. After a few hours of kirtan at the beach, it was midsummer. A bunch of devotees piled into the back of the rented truck, and we drove the Jagannath deities 25 miles out to see Swami in Stinton Beach. We described to him our adventures on the day, and he said ours had the same tone of madness, near accident and jubilation of the sacred Rath Yatra festivals in India. Yes, in Puri, sometimes the cart will roll backwards, sometimes it will stop, and only with great effort can they make it move. Krishna enjoys this sporting adventure, seeing his devotees cry out for him, but Krishna is in control. So, I'm going to have another 10 minutes or so. On Saturdays we usually go to about 9, quarter to 9. Okay, so we've got time for another couple of Rath Yatra festivals. Would you like that? The second Rath Yatra festival in San Francisco, and then we'll do the first one in London as well. So we're in 1968 now. Of course, since then, meanwhile, ISKCON has been growing in New York and San Francisco and everybody else. Other temples too, by this time. The second annual San Francisco Rath Yatra was coming up fast. Swamiji had set the date, June the 30th, 68. The Swami was in Montreal and he wouldn't be able to come to San Francisco due to visa and immigration problems. This time he instructed that the Rath cart should be built from scratch, with wheels, decks, canopies, the full cart, not an open-sided box on the back of a flatbed truck like previous. So I started designing it with Jayananda's help. Jayananda was still driving his taxi, so we worked up on shifts and recruited a few other carpenter types to help us. It was a big endeavour. The cart would be 23 foot high, decorated with a beautiful canopy. We weren't sure what to do with the front axle because we had to turn to get around corners. Of course, you have to remember, I was recounting in Jagannath Puri, the Grand Marg, it's the widest and probably the longest road in Puri, but there's not many corners between the Gundicha Mandir and the carts don't turn. But imagine you're doing festivals in London or San Francisco where you've got to take 90-degree angles sometimes. So they had to design a way of turning the Rath carts, you see. Jayananda, however, knew automobile mechanics somewhat, and I had built a hot rod in high school, whatever that is. So we welded a cart wheel into the centre of the front axle as a pivot and ran 2 beams straight onto the front axle. 2 long 1-inch ropes were tied to the front pipe, so dozens of people would be able to pull the cart in tandem, but also change the direction of the cart as well. A team of devotees hand-sanded these timbers for days in order to make them look new. The mood was, make it stout for Lord Jagannath. The cloth canopies were dyed by the ladies and were rather more orange than saffron. Anyway, a 6-inch yellow fringe was sewed onto the canopies and little bells fashioned around the entire deck at 6-inch intervals. Big posters of the seated Swami were mounted front, side and back of the car. This year, the little generator was mounted at the rear and underneath the cart on its own frame to somewhat diminish the sound and fumes. Because the previous year, the generator was fuming black smoke as well. Anyway. Their 3 lordships would sit on a simple altar at the front of the top deck, looking forward, best seats in the house, and for the first time, the deities would be clothed. So the previous year, Shamsund had painted the deities with Jayanada's help, and they had clothes on already, but this year they actually would have physical clothes for the first time in ISKCON in Rath Yatra. But the clothes will cover up the beautiful paint job, I said. Yamuna overrode me, saying that the Swamiji had directed her to make clothes for the divine trio. And of course, Yamuna, of course, was expert in making those clothes. So that year, happy to say, there was no kind of big problems with the Rath Yatra festival. It was very, very successful. Jumping back now to 1969, now we're in London. 1 year after, so it's 3 consecutive Rath Yatras that we're describing here. June the 27th, Rath Yatra Day in London. It was quite cold. So they'd made the cart, and I think they were staying somewhere in Balham. Where's Balham, by the way? What part of London is Balham? Is it South London? So they made this cart in a parking lot area in South London. And they had to get it, of course, to, I believe it was Marble Arch, that area. So it was a long journey. And remember, they didn't have much money in those days. They had to start bringing the cart by hand, pushing it from Balham to Marble Arch, and they had to leave at 4 a.m. in the morning. When there was Mukunda, Gurudas and Ted Burke joined me in Balham to start moving the Rath cart to Marble Arch, with no clear idea on how we were really going to do it, and depending solely, of course, on Lord Krishna. All the wood and materials we needed to assemble the crown was stacked on the lower deck. Talking about the crown of the Rath Yatra cart. And that I would pull with the truck, and the 3 guys would go behind and push it. It was still dark at 4 a.m. and we started off down Balham Park Road. To avoid the main roads as much as possible, we had to take a back route from Balham, which meant narrow roads, more corners. More men would join us along the way, but it was a tough go. When we get to a corner, everyone was pushing one wheel or the other, angling it backwards and forwards, little by little, like doing a 3-point turn or something, and until it got round the corner. It reached 90 degrees. Kind residents saw us struggling, and some people passed by, although there wasn't many around, but some lent a hand to cheer us on. I wish that would happen more these days in London. Of course, in those days, there was a bit more neighbourly spirit, it would seem. Cobblestones on some of the side streets made the car jerk and tremble in god-awful ways. I was worried that the thing would fall apart. Bits and pieces do fall off here and there, but still we just put them on and we think we'll repair it later. Then it's 4 miles north of Warwick Road to Shepherd's Bush. Hang a right on Bayswater Road and another 2 miles along Hyde Park to the staging area at Marble Arch. The truck's 4-cylinder motor strains, a plume of black smoke poured from the exhaust pipe. Get that through the health and safety these days. Yeah. 6 hours later, 6 hours, around 10 a.m, we arrived at Marble Arch and the parade was about to start. Poet Ted Burke, later initiated by Prabhupada as Ramatanu, described that day in an article he wrote for the Back to Godhead magazine. It is the backyard of an ordinary English neighbourhood, but soon the red-haired 5-year-old who lives next door begins to repeat after us as we fixed oversized wooden carriage wheels to the frame. Hare Krishna, smiling, feeling the devotion, asking his mother if he can join our procession. Sometimes Prabhu Malati sends down orange drink and prasad. And Indian boys stop after the day's work to paint a wheel or sand a frame. To work directly for Krishna is so irresistible that it doesn't seem like work at all. Such a large, noble creation being pushed through the dawn-light streets, first in the European world in history. This cart bearing the ever-brightening, smiling personality of Godhead, Lord Jagannath. Then, after 6 hours' journey over the historic bridges, they arrive at Hyde Park. We get there and it's total chaos. At least there are now many men to help, and piece by piece we assemble the 20-foot crown from bottom to top, hanging from a flimsy structure to tighten the bolts, whistling in the wind. A huge bundle of red satin is passed up, and Yamuna yells out instructions as we somehow fit the canopy over the top of the swaying crown, fighting vertical on miscalculation, little by little pulling it down tight, taking off again to adjust, redo, and at last it's finished and it looks symmetrical and fantastic. We arranged 200-foot lengths, 1-inch rope to each front of the cart so people can pull it. I run back down to Balam to pick up Malati and Sarasvati and the Jagannath deities in the car. The deities are escorted to their seats on the cart and they are garlanded, fully clothed. The sound system's going, BT magazines are flying out, and there's a huge crowd. More decorations are going up, and we catch up with Ten Burke's narrative in the Back to Godhead magazine. We arrive at Hyde Park and humbly lay the garlanded flowers at the lotus feet of the deities, the frames swaying as we place the ladder against to stable the red and yellow satin, the Hare Krishna banner and the other bunting of multicoloured flags. Other banners of Indian communities are being carried in, east and west, singing to Lord Krishna. Small children from grey-haired grandmothers with tilak all wanted to pull the rope that will send dancing the Lord, the grand Lord of the universe. Then the conches sounded, and with the transcendental broom sweeping away the material dust, we danced towards Trafalgar Square, the street resounding with Haribo! All glories to Jagannath, hey Jagannath! The rough cart jerks forward and slowly thousands pull and shout and scream and chant, and then it gains momentum and speed. We pull it 100 feet or so, then it lurches to the right and the rough cart collapses. The right front wheel broken off the axle. No one can believe it. After all those miles of rough travel across cobblestones from Balam in the morning, just a few hundred feet and it collapses. And on top of that, they were promised an elephant from London Zoo and it never showed up. I think it was Mukunda who was doing some sweet talking and someone may have kind of like told him a white lie or something. So the elephant didn't show up, which is very unfortunate. The cops tell us we have to move this beached whale on the road quickly as blocking traffic on one of London's busiest streets. How can we move it? We have to dismantle the whole thing, bolt by bolt, and I'm already exhausted. I haven't slept for 20 hours. I'm about to collapse myself. I say to Trivikram, here's the toolbox. You take care of this. I need some rest. And he was an ex-Navy guy, and he was good at receiving orders. So he takes my toolbox and he starts to work. Meanwhile, at the parade starting point, devotees remove deities from their fallen coach and burden them in hastily improvised palanquins decorated, and 2,000 celebrants march and dance down the parade route all the way to Trafalgar Square with the palanquins in front. Despite the cart's failure, it was a great Rath Yatra afternoon at the base of Nelson's Column. Next day, the papers report the event in a positive way, not even mentioning that it caused one of the worst traffic jams in London's history. Prabhupada was shocked to hear news of the collapsing cart, but he saw the whole event from a higher perspective. In a letter to me, that's Shamsundar speaking, in a letter to me, dated August the 13th, my merciful spiritual master wrote, "When I first heard that the wheels of the car collapsed, it was such a great shock to me that the whole day I was sick and morose. And now I'm receiving this letter and your pictures, but I'm now very much enlivened. The cart was on the road and the photo is taken with a multitude of people. That is your success, and as a result of this collapse you have got sympathy from the Indian community as well as all the people of London. I think we may take it as Krishna's grace that the incident, that the difficulty took place at the very beginning of the procession and not later on when the Rath cart was in an even more populated area. So, do not feel discouraged at all. By Krishna's plan, everything will come out for the best. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So, I'd like to end there. I've been sharing, so lots of different Rath Yatras have been shared from the beginning days of ISKCON, of course, and the trials and tribulations, and which of course saturated with Bhakti, of course, and the Abhay Charan's mini Rath Yatra festival, the big one, where Lord Jagannath blessed Bimal Prasad, and of course, all connected, of course, to the Rath Yatra of course, with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. So, has anyone got anything to add before we finish the class? Okay, thank you. Sri Caitanya-Caritāmṛta ki jai, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai, Jagannath Rath Yatra ki jai. All glories to somebody devotees. All glories to somebody devotees. All glories to somebody devotees.